He lied about everything. I always thought I was good at reading people. I could tell when someone was hiding something or when their words didn't quite match their actions. But he was different. He was charming, funny, and he made me feel like the most important person in the room. And when he looked at me with those eyes, so full of sincerity, I believed everything he said. Looking back now, I wonder how I didn't see the signs earlier. Maybe I was just too trusting, too naive, or maybe I was simply in love. I don't know. But what I do know is that I spent months, even years, believing a man who lied to me about everything. It started so innocently. We met at a coffee shop, the kind of place where the scent of freshly ground coffee fills the air and the sound of soft jazz lingers in the background. He was sitting at a table by the window, reading a book. I noticed him immediately, not because of anything particularly special about his appearance, but because of the way he carried himself. There was something magnetic about him, something that made it impossible to look away. He smiled when I caught his eye, and that smile was enough to melt the barriers I usually put up around myself. We started talking, and the conversation flowed effortlessly. He told me he was a writer, that he had just returned from traveling around the world. He spoke with such passion about his experiences, about the people he had met, about the places he had seen. His words painted pictures in my mind, and I couldn't help but be captivated by his stories. As the weeks went by, we spent more time together. He was the kind of person who made everything seem exciting, even the most mundane activities. Whether we were walking through the park, having dinner at a small restaurant, or just sitting in his apartment talking about life, I felt like I was in a fairy tale. I was happy, truly happy for the first time in a long time. But then little things started to bother me. At first, it was small things that I brushed off. He would tell me about a trip he had taken, but the details didn't always line up. One time, he mentioned being in Paris, but then he said he didn't like the food there. I'd been to Paris, and I knew that even if you weren't a fan of French cuisine, the experience itself was magical. I didn't say anything, though. I trusted him. Then there was the time he said he had grown up in a small town near the coast. He painted such a vivid picture of his childhood, walking along the beach, fishing with his father, and watching the sunset every evening. It sounded perfect, the kind of life I had always dreamed of. But when I asked him for more details, he became vague, changing the subject quickly. I didn't push, but the lies, the small inconsistencies, started to pile up. And every time I confronted him, he would apologize, explaining that he had just been exaggerating for effect or that he had misunderstood something. And each time, I believed him. I remember the first time I felt truly unsettled. It was a Sunday afternoon, and we were sitting in a park talking about our future. I asked him if he had ever thought about settling down, getting married, starting a family. His answer caught me off guard. He told me that he wasn't ready for any of that he still wanted to travel the world, to write his book, to experience life before he thought about something as permanent as marriage. At the time, I didn't mind. I admired his ambition. I told him I understood, that I wasn't in a hurry either. But as time went on, I began to question if I was just a part of his temporary journey, something to keep him company until he was ready for something else. It was a feeling I couldn't shake, but I tried to ignore it. I kept telling myself that everything would be fine, that he was just different, that his words didn't need to be scrutinized. But deep down, I knew something wasn't right. One evening, I found myself sitting alone in his apartment, flipping through some of his old journals that were scattered across the coffee table. He had told me so many times how important writing was to him, how he had always dreamed of being a successful author. But when I opened one of the journals, I saw something that made my stomach drop. It wasn't a journal at all, but a series of notebooks filled with the same stories he had told me. Stories about traveling, about his childhood, about the people he had met. But they weren't his stories. They were borrowed, copied from books and articles he had read over the years. It was the first real lie I had uncovered, and it hurt more than I could have imagined. My mind raced as I tried to process what I had found. Had he really been lying about everything? Had every word he had spoken to me been a fabrication, a story he had created to impress me? I confronted him that night. He looked guilty, but not sorry. He admitted that some of the stories were exaggerated, that he had embellished the truth for the sake of his writing. But when I pressed him about the journal, about the stories that weren't even his, he got defensive. He told me I was overreacting, that I shouldn't be so serious, that it didn't matter. But it did matter. It mattered more than anything. Because the lies were no longer small, no longer harmless. They were a part of who he was, a part of everything he had built. And in that moment, I realized that I had no idea who he truly was. The lies continued to pile up. Each time I asked him a question, he would give me an answer that didn't add up. He would tell me he had been to places I knew he hadn't, that he knew people I knew he didn't. And each time I caught him in a lie, I felt a little more lost, a little more unsure of myself. I started to doubt everything, the way he looked at me, the way he kissed me, the way he said he loved me. I started questioning if any of it was real or if it was all just part of the act he had been putting on. But I didn't leave. I stayed, hoping that the man I had fallen in love with would come back. I stayed, believing that somehow, some way, things would go back to how they were before the lies started. I kept convincing myself that he was just confused, that he didn't know how to be honest, but that deep down, he loved me. I wanted to believe that. I really did. But one day, I found out the truth. He wasn't confused, and he didn't love me. He was just a liar, someone who had mastered the art of pretending, of weaving stories that were never his own. And the worst part? He had lied about everything, about his past, about his future, about his feelings, about who he was. I realized that he had never been the person I thought he was. The man I had fallen in love with was just a version of himself he had created to keep me around. The truth was, he didn't care about me. He didn't care about anyone. He cared only about the stories he could tell, the image he could project. It hurt. It hurt more than I can describe, because I had trusted him. I had given him my heart, my time, my energy, and he had thrown it all away without a second thought. But I learned something important from all of this. I learned that I am worth more than the lies of someone who never truly cared for me. I learned that I deserve honesty, that I deserve love that is real, not a performance. And I learned that sometimes the hardest thing to do is walk away from someone you thought was your everything. So I walked away. I let go of the lies, the illusions, and the false promises. I took back my life, and I promised myself that I would never let someone manipulate me again. The truth hurts, but it also sets you free. And now, as I sit here telling you this story, I know that I am stronger because of it. I may have been lied to, but I am not a victim. I am a survivor, and I will never again settle for anything less than the truth.